Every time a government announces a new tariff, the same scene plays out. A politician stands at a podium, flags behind them, and explains that a foreign country is finally going to pay its fair share. That the factories are coming back. That this is a win for the working people of this country and a cost imposed on someone else, somewhere else, who has been taking advantage for too long. The crowd responds. The headline writes itself. And somewhere, in a warehouse in Ohio or a retail chain's procurement office in New Jersey, an accountant quietly opens a spreadsheet and starts calculating how much prices are going up next quarter. The politician and the accountant are describing the same tariff. They are not describing the same reality. Here is how a tariff actually works, mechanically, before the politics get involved. A tariff is a tax. Specifically, it is a tax on imported goods, collected at the border by the importing country's customs authority. When a shipment of steel arrives from abroad, the importing company, the American company, the domestic buyer, pays a percentage of that shipment's value directly to its own government before the goods can enter the country. That is the transaction. The foreign exporter does not write a check to the U.S. Treasury. The foreign government does not transfer funds. The American importer pays the tax. At the border. In dollars. To their own government. This is not a matter of interpretation or ideology. It is the mechanical description of what happens when a tariff is collected. And it is almost never what gets communicated to the public when a tariff is announced. Now, the response to this is usually, fine, but the cost gets passed back to the exporter. The foreign company lowers its prices to stay competitive, absorbing the tariff. America wins. And sometimes, this is partially true. Under certain conditions, in certain markets, exporters do reduce their prices to maintain market share. Economists call this a terms of trade gain. The tariff effectively forces the foreign producer to subsidize the price difference. But the conditions required for this to work cleanly are fairly specific. The exporting country needs to have few alternative markets. The product needs to be something the importer can't easily source elsewhere. The foreign producer needs to have thin enough margins that they'll absorb the hit rather than walk away. And the market needs to be competitive enough that the importer passes any savings through to consumers rather than pocketing them. When all of those conditions hold, a tariff might work roughly as advertised. Those conditions rarely all hold simultaneously. Take the tariffs imposed on Chinese goods beginning in 2018 and expanded significantly through 2025. These were among the largest and most sweeping tariff actions in modern American history, covering hundreds of billions of dollars in imports across thousands of product categories. The stated logic was that China would bear the cost, through reduced export revenue, through pressure on Chinese manufacturers, through a negotiating disadvantage that would force concessions. What the data showed was different. Multiple independent economic studies, including research from the Federal Reserve, the National Bureau of Economic Research, and the IMF, found that the overwhelming majority of the tariff costs were passed through to American importers and, from there, to American consumers and businesses. Chinese export prices, measured in dollars, barely moved. American import prices rose by roughly the full amount of the tariff. One Federal Reserve study estimated that the 2018 tariff rounds cost the average American household several $100s per year in higher prices, not as a side effect, but as the primary mechanism of transmission. The foreign country did not pay. The domestic consumer did. Quietly. Through the price of everything from washing machines to industrial components to furniture to electronics. Here is where it gets more layered than a simple consumer price story. Tariffs on intermediate goods, components and materials used to make other things, don't just raise consumer prices. They raise the cost of domestic production. An American manufacturer that buys imported steel to make appliances, or imported semiconductors to make machinery, now faces higher input costs. Which means higher prices for their products. Which means less competitive American exports in global markets. Which means, potentially, job losses in the very industries the tariff was designed to protect. This is the irony that tends to get swallowed by the political narrative. Tariffs on raw materials and components often hurt domestic manufacturers more directly than they hurt foreign exporters. The American steel tariff protects American steel producers. It simultaneously raises costs for every American industry that uses steel, automotive, construction, appliances, infrastructure. The number of jobs in steel-consuming industries in the United States is roughly 80 times larger than the number of jobs in steel production. Protecting one industry by taxing the inputs of 80 others is a trade-off. It is not obviously a win. None of this means tariffs are never justified. There are legitimate strategic arguments, protecting industries critical to national security, countering unfair subsidies by foreign governments, creating negotiating leverage in trade disputes. These are real considerations that serious economists take seriously. But the argument for a tariff and the description of who pays for it are two separate conversations. And in public discourse, they almost always get collapsed into one. The politician announcing a tariff is not lying, exactly. They are describing the intended target. The accountant updating the spreadsheet is describing the actual mechanism. Both are responding to the same policy. But only one of them is telling you what shows up in your receipt. The gap between those two descriptions, the intended target and the actual payer, is not a bug in how tariffs are communicated. It is, at this point, a remarkably durable feature. Because the person who pays the tariff votes. The foreign exporter does not. And if the voter doesn't understand the mechanism, the politician never has to explain the math. Which raises a question that goes well beyond tariffs. How many other economic policies are being described entirely in terms of their intended targets, while the actual cost quietly lands somewhere the announcement never mentions?